You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 25th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Has the DRC-Rwanda war been called off? The Vatican prepares to host presidents, monarchs and prime ministers to farewell the Pope, and a guided tour of Monocle's new look website. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Phil Clark and Juliet Linley will discuss today's big stories. We'll speak to Uwade on the release of her debut album, and we'll have our weekly wrap-up of what we've learned. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. A handshake between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin in the Rose Garden of the White House remains obviously a work in progress, but a significant meeting between two other adversaries is scheduled to occur today in Washington, D.C. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting with his counterparts from Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, who will sign what is being touted as a declaration of principles, which will hopefully lead to a mutual agreement not to proceed any further towards open conflict. Now, I'm joined with more on this by Phil Clark, Professor of International Politics at SOAS, University of London. Phil, is this a surprise, first of all?
It's a big surprise, Andrew. I don't think anybody thought that the US was a significant player in this peace negotiation between Rwanda and Congo. We've seen a wide range of mediators involved over the last few months. We've seen Angola play a very serious role. We've seen the Qatari government in the last couple of weeks try to mediate this conflict. No one really saw Washington and Marco Rubio playing any kind of role in this, so I think this has caught everybody off guard.
Does it appear to be the case that Rwanda, which was substantially the belligerent power here, sending its proxies into the DRC, has agreed to stand back, call it off? Apologies. Have they just got out ahead of themselves, or have they had a better offer?
I think Rwanda wants to know what the offer is. And I think if we look at the previous negotiations with Angola and also in Qatar, Rwanda wants to see what Congo's offering, and now we'll be wanting to see what the US is offering. The reason for that is Rwanda's very much on the front foot at the moment. Their proxy, the M23 rebel group, is very much winning on the battlefield in Congo, has captured a huge amount of territory in the last few months and is in a very powerful political position. So Rwanda will go into any negotiations in a very, very strong position. What they seem to be angling for here is a piece of the US's mineral deal, which it looks like the US will do with Congo. I think Rwanda wants something very lucrative to be offered. They will need to see that before they're willing to take this negotiation forward.
I mean, there are many interesting quirks to this, as you say, somewhat surprising announcement, but one of them is surely that this does involve Rwanda acknowledging that M23 is a Rwandan proxy, which is something that they have been at best cagey about admitting.
Indeed. Rwanda spent most of the last 18 months denying both that they're backing M23 and that the Rwandan army, don't have a presence inside Congo, but both of those statements are demonstrably false. And Rwanda can really only engage in these negotiations by admitting to those two things that they've been denying for a very long time. I think what this shows here is that both Rwanda and the DRC have been watching what Ukraine has been trying to do in terms of a minerals for peace kind of deal. And these two African states, I think, both of them with large amounts of natural resources themselves, see a real opportunity here. And I think that's going to be a key part of the bargain in Washington over the next couple of days.
I mean, it is worth remembering that, to say the very least, this is not the first go-round between the DRC and Rwanda, or Rwanda's proxies. They have been, by my count, at least half a dozen other truces and ceasefires this decade alone. Is there any reason to suspect, as far as it's possible to tell at this early stage, that this one will hold any more solidly than the others?
No, there's really no reason at all at the moment to think that this ceasefire will hold. We saw the M23 rebels yesterday sign a ceasefire with the Congolese government, in fact, in Doha. So Qatar is still involved in this process. But over the last few months, we've seen M23 violate almost every single ceasefire that they've signed. What they tend to do is use these negotiations as a chance to buy some breathing space that they often then keep ploughing on in Congo and capturing more territory. Many observers, I think, believe that we may see something similar in the next few days. That's going to be the real challenge for the US. Can they put enough on the table, and can they use the political leverage that they've got over both Rwanda and Congo to produce the kind of ceasefire that we really haven't seen in the last 18 months or so?
Because is there any suggestion that there will be any monitoring process, and if so, who will be providing it? Because as you intimated earlier, this is not a small amount of territory we are talking about. This is a decent-sized chunk of the DRC that M23 have conquered, and this is a decent-sized chunk of dangerous landlocked jungle, which I suspect most foreign powers will not be overly keen to send their troops to.
That's right, Andrew. And over the last year or so, we've seen a wide range of other peacekeeping forces, regional forces on the ground in Eastern Congo, either there to fight on the side of the Congolese army or to try to hold notionally some sort of peace and to keep the belligerents apart. All of those regional forces have scarpered in the last year. The East Africans have done that. The Southern Africans have done that. It really does create a military vacuum, that there aren't really any military candidates putting their hands up to do this kind of ceasefire enforcement role that any peace process would need. So there's a real challenge in terms of what happens in Washington in the next couple of days. These are principles that are going to be signed on. That the hope is that will lead to a longer peace negotiation over the next few weeks, and possibly even lead to a peace agreement. But even if that agreement is signed, one of the big questions would be who, in fact, would militarily enforce it on the ground in Eastern Congo.
But what could the parameters of an agreement like that be? Because this is one of those ones where it's pretty clear what one party wants, i.e. the DRC. What they want is for Rwanda and its proxies to clear off and let the DRC's government have a crack at actually governing the DRC. If we look at it from the other perspective, is it clear what President Kagame of Rwanda's long game is? What does he actually want from, or which bits of Congo does he actually want?
There's real confusion, I think, even within Kagame's own ranks about what Rwanda's objectives are here. I was just in Kigali about 2 weeks ago and was speaking to various senior people there about what they thought the end game was likely to be in Eastern Congo. And most of them, I think, are scratching their heads. I think it's possible that only Kagame himself knows. I think the speculation is that what Rwanda wants is a permanent sphere of influence in Eastern Congo. They don't want to capture this territory permanently, but they do want to control it. And so that would mean installing local administrators who are very friendly to Kigali. That, of course, is a red rag to a bull from Tshisekedi and the Congolese government's point of view. But I think that's the kind of bargain that Rwanda will be driving in Washington, that they'll be saying both to Congo and to the US, look, we're on top here. We control a huge swathe of your territory. We're not leaving anytime soon. There's zero chance that the Congolese army can push us out. So you got to give us something that gives us a serious incentive to leave. And what that incentive may look like is continued political and economic control via local proxies and local administrators. I think that's the kind of bargain that Rwanda will be trying to drive in the next couple of days and over the next few weeks.
And Phil, just as a final quick thought, how does one account for the slightly bizarre dynamic that appears to be in play here? Because if you look at the two countries on a map, or indeed measure them by population, etc., Congo absolutely dwarfs Rwanda. How is it that Rwanda is in a position to dictate terms at all? I mean, it looks like Luxembourg trying to invade France.
This is exactly the thing that surprises most Congolese people living in Eastern DRC, is how does our tiny neighbor continue to dominate us as they have done for the last 20 or 25 years. I think the simple answer is that Rwanda and the Rwandan army are incredibly organized, incredibly disciplined, incredibly driven, but by a clear set of objectives over the last 20 or 25 years. The Congolese government lacks almost all of those features. Congo really struggles to control the eastern provinces. We see a really ill-disciplined, underpaid, kleptocratic Congolese army that tends to prey on its own civilian population. So in the face of that really chaotic situation on the Congolese side, Rwanda continues to see a huge opportunity to enrich itself and to expand its political influence. So that's how we end up with this very tiny state that, of course, itself experienced a genocide only 30 years ago and has been recovering from its own violence, is nevertheless able to exert so much control in its much larger Western neighbour.
Phil Clark, thanks as always for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio. Tomorrow morning in the Vatican, the funeral of Pope Francis will be held in St. Peter's Basilica. For all the efforts Francis made during his pontificate to trim some of the gilded edges off the papacy, this will not be a low-key affair. Any pope is not only the head of a church, but a head of state. The world's smallest state, to be sure, but one with a hefty footprint. In the pews of St. Peter's tomorrow will be at least 60 other current or former heads of state, among them 10 monarchs, along with a small horde of prime ministers, heirs apparent, and so forth. Well, I'm joined with more from the Vatican by Juliet Linley, journalist and former Vatican correspondent. Juliet, it's the last day of official mourning today. Indeed, if I've done the maths right, it's the last hours of official mourning or public mourning right now. How long has the procession been?
Last minutes, I would say at 8 o'clock, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, he's the Irish-born American cardinal, and the Camerlengo, who is overseeing all the activities at the Holy See during this sede vacante, which means during this interregnum between the Pope's death and when a new Pope is chosen, at 8 o'clock, so European time, so that's in like 40 minutes or 45 minutes, he will shut the casket in which Pope Francis has been lying in state since Wednesday morning, and will then proceed to prepare for the funeral that takes place, as you said, at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So there has been a huge influx of pilgrims. The numbers I'm hearing is around 130, 140,000, and those would be the ones who are filing silently into the basilica, standing for hours waiting outside. And it's been a very hot, sunny day today, Andrew, to pay their respects to this first Jesuit, first Argentinian Pope, which so many who I'm talking to here as they queue up, which so many love so much. I was talking to two ladies who hopped on a night bus on an overnight coach from Piedmont last night, and who came all the way and arrived at 7:30 this morning, stood in line for 3 hours. They were overwhelmed, they said, when they came out, having seen the Pope and having said goodbye to him. And they said to me, it's as if we had lost a grandfather. So you have different types of pilgrims coming. You, of course, have just local Romans who want to say goodbye to someone who they even considered almost their neighbor, since the Vatican City and the Vatican walls are so close to the residential area called Prati and Borgo Pio. You've also got just pilgrims who are here because it is a holy year. 2025 is a Jubilee year, and a lot of pilgrims had planned to come to Rome during these days. In any case, you've got people who are still here because it was Easter. Just last Sunday, it was Easter Sunday, and they actually saw the Pope, and he came and blessed everybody, an Urbi et Orbi blessing from the balcony on Easter Sunday. And then just a day later, he passed away. And interestingly, Andrew, I've been talking to so many teenagers, which might surprise some of us who come from perhaps more secular worlds. And they are here because this weekend was supposed to be the canonization of a British-born Italian teenager. He was 14 when he died, and he was a techie, and he used the internet to spread the gospel, if you want, to spread the word. And he was to become a saint on Sunday. However, without a pope, you cannot create a saint. Therefore, his canonization has been postponed. So a variety of pilgrims all here. And tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we will all be eyes glued to our screens or inside the basilica, as we said, for the beginning of this very important funeral of Pope Francis.
I mean, even away from the queues and the pilgrims, though, what has Rome felt like generally? Italy declared 5 days of national mourning, which is unusual even for the passing of a pope.
It is unusual. And if you look at it, on the one hand, it underscores, if you want, the respect and admiration that is held by Italians, by the authorities, as well as by the people for this pontiff, for this Argentinian pontiff, who came from Italian migrant parents, if you want. It also shows the desire to give people a chance to pay their respects. Having seen perhaps during John Paul II's funeral, which was in 2005, I was here reporting about that quite a while ago. And that was the last papal funeral there has been, because remember, Pope Benedict died, but he was no longer in office. He had resigned his position in 2013, and he passed away just a couple of years ago, but that wasn't a papal funeral. So judging from the huge influx of pilgrims, of people wanting to pay homage to the Pope, and the thousands who kept coming and making their way into the basilica to pay their respects, the decision was to give 5 days in order for the people to have from Wednesday morning until now, practically in half an hour, to do just that, to go and see the Pope as he lies in state inside the Basilica of St. Peter's.
I mean, it is remarkable to consider that because of that abdication of Pope Benedict, it's almost exactly 20 years since the last full-dress papal funeral. What sense do you get of the scale of what awaits us tomorrow?
It's going to be a very large affair. You've got so many people coming, just all the cardinals have flown in from all corners of the earth. You've got bishops, you've got archbishops, and then, as you said before, you've got royalty, you've got Catholic royalty who will be sitting ahead of, if you want, the government representatives and dignitaries. I know that there was some chatter on some of the British press about Donald Trump being seated quite far back, and how he had mentioned that Joe Biden at the Queen's funeral had been seated far back, and he sort of made some ironic jokes about it. But then here again, he's not going to be front line here either. It's going to be a large affair. And what's interesting, Andrew, is that apart from all these dignitaries and royalties, by the Pope's desire, his own desire, there will be poor people and migrants at the funeral. You'll remember that he is the person who always reached out to people on life's margins. And he specified that he would like them to be there too. So you'll have homeless, you'll have refugees, you'll have migrants at the funeral mass, and then also at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, because contrary to what previous popes in recent times have wanted to do, Pope Francis does not want to be buried inside the Vatican. He wants to be buried at one of the 4 major basilicas, his favorite one, which is called St. Mary Major. And it's about 6 kilometers away from the Vatican. And there too, there will be members of the, of poor people or migrants will be there when his casket arrives in the hearse. So Andrew, it's going to be a different funeral to previous ones. And of course, if you think about the security and the logistical nightmare or headache that it's going to be for the Italian authorities tomorrow, with the hearse traversing the city, lines of people wanting to catch a glimpse of the coffin as it goes by. It's going to be interesting to see it play out.
Juliet Linley in the Vatican, thanks for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. You're listening to the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. If you happen to have taken a look at Monocle's website this week, you'll have noticed something different, indeed quite a lot different. If you haven't taken a look at Monocle's website this week, a treat awaits. Monocle.com has been spectacularly overhauled, and joining me now to talk us through it is Kate Lucy, Monocle's head of digital. Kate, it's up, it's live, it's happened.
Finally. Some thought this day would never come, including me at some point.
Well, I do actually want to wind this back from where we are now, when somebody comes to you and says, redesign the website of a media brand such as Monocle, where do you even start?
Yes, that's a good question, because it can be hard to know. But I think at the core of it, you have to think of, and this sounds like a very existential question, but what is the brand? What is Monocle, and what do we say to readers? Why do people enjoy Monocle? Why would people want to visit a website to find out more from Monocle, and what would they expect to find there? So the design point, I mean, we're lucky to have in the business such talented creative directors and creative talent who have been with Monocle since launch, since it was conceived. So we took a lot of inspiration from the talent that we already have in-house, and then it's thinking about how to present what we already do very well, so incredible journalism, beautiful photography, in a more digestible way that works with a screen of any size that somebody can access from any place. So it's breezy. No biggie.
I mean, how difficult is that aspect of it, though, adjusting the content? Because, as listeners and readers will appreciate, Monocle takes great pride in how it looks in a very, very old school fashion. How easy or otherwise is it to sort of render that, for example, on a telephone?
It is difficult, and I think it's definitely one of the high points of Monocle is that it takes such pride in its aesthetics, because a lot of places, especially online, don't at the moment, and they just churn out a lot of clickbait that's cheaply made from someone in bed on ChatGPT, I think Josh wrote in his column yesterday. So it is difficult to think about how to repackage that in a way that still makes sense and still looks good. As you'll see in the magazine, you'll open a beautiful spread of a feature and it'll have some very clever headline. I always refer to a winter feature that was called Best in Snow because it was winter fashion, and it's nice. It works on a page because you're presented with the feature and you know what you're getting. Online, you need more context. If you're scrolling through a homepage and you see Best in Snow, that doesn't mean anything. So it does need to be a bit more detailed, a bit more contextual. So you could keep Best in Snow, but you'd have to add the highlights of winter fashion from, I don't know, the footsteps of St. Moritz, wherever you are. So it does need, more consideration when you're thinking how to tell the stories digitally, even if it's just the wording before you even get to the visuals.
And on the new site, is there any sort of new scorching hot content that wasn't there on the previous website?
Absolutely burning hot, piping hot content. Yes, we are uploading and publishing digital-only content that will not have featured in the magazine and that will not have featured in the Monocle Minute, alongside the magazine content in a digital way. So digital subscribers will also be able to read the magazine online and two different formats. The PDF version that we have, you can flip through as if you were swiping through the magazine pages yourself, just on your screen, or in the more traditional website individual article format, you could scroll through the business section, the culture section, design section, etc. But we will also be having new commentary, new features, new opinions, interviews, insights, just for the website. Alongside, very excitedly, some updated and more detailed travel guides, which now include their own maps that you can download and have as an accompaniment, and to bring Monocle with you as you walk every step of your way through Paris and baguette by baguette.
I just wanted to close by going a bit back to where we came in, which was the process by which this came into being. And I don't want to talk about the sort of false starts and rewrites and revisits, of which I'm sure there were plenty. But were there along the way any, I guess, happy accidents? Were there things that were lit upon along the way that you may not have thought about at the start of it, but it was just like, oh, that's interesting, that actually works. We like that.
Oh, happy accidents. Certainly a lot of accidents. I'm not sure if any of them were happy. I think because I've only been in Monocle since the start of the year. I've only been in the business for a few months. So the happy discoveries that I've made along the way are how engaged the Monocle readers are. And it's to a level that I've never experienced. I've worked in publishing for over 10 years, multiple brands, of loved brands. But none seem quite as loved as Monocle. I think it's beautiful that the readers are so connected to the brand, and we do get very fast feedback.
So I've noticed.
Whether it's good or bad, but in moments after we pressed the big red button, cut the ribbon and showered the confetti yesterday, we had people in our inboxes commenting on how beautiful the site looks. So that's great. That's not so much an accident, but it is definitely happy.
Kate Lucy, thank you for joining us. That was Kate Lucy, Monocle's head of digital. That splendid new website is perusable now at monocle.com. You're listening to The Daily. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Muller. Time now for our weekly assessment of what the last 7 days have taught us.
Say my name, say my name.
We learned this week that nominative determinism is just not a thing.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay. Tell me more.
Let's see where this goes.
Since you asked, nominative determinism is the idea that a person's name is to some extent their destiny, that what a person is called kind of dictates who and what that person becomes, perhaps even to the extent of guiding their future career direction. Interestingly, the concept was first described by Norman Attive determinism.
That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name.
We learned, however, that nominative determinism is hooey, bunkum, and indeed balderdash, and we learned this, if little else, when we learned of the existence of this modern American conservative philosopher.
You know, the hardest person to be right now in America is white males, right?
Is it, though?
Let's go back to just seeing each other the way the founders decided we should see each other, as equal.
The same founders, presumably, who specified in the original text of the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution that enslaved black people counted for the purposes of allocating each state's congressional representation and tax bill as just 3/5 of any other citizen. We learned, not for the first time and not in the first country, that those who most loudly declare themselves patriots tend to possess the least actual knowledge of the country whose virtues they are noisily extolling, a proposition with which I am sure the General Muttered Agreement crew will concur. Anyway, we learned that this sage was the president and founder of Christians Engaged, whose general proclivities may be gleaned from their name, and good luck to them. But to return to our setup about nominative determinism, which to be honest is starting to feel a bit laboured, but we've come this far, we learned that her given name has turned out to be very much not congruent with a career as a hectoring evangelist, indeed arguably quite the opposite, being as it genuinely actually is Bunny Pounds. It's Bunny with an I as well. Anyway, elsewhere amid the ongoing efforts to make America great again, we learned that if anything will atone for a 7% slide in stock markets occasioned by a pointless trade war waged at least in part against blameless penguins, it is apparently flagpoles.
We're putting up a beautiful, almost 100-foot tall American flag on this side and another one on the other side, 2 flags, top of the line, and they've needed flagpoles for 200 years. It was something I've often said, you know, they don't have a flagpole per se.
Yes. Come on, let's have a sound effect of flags flapping as if from 100-foot poles planted either side of the White House. We learned, therefore, that US President Donald Trump has lived in the White House slightly more than 4 years, or slightly more than 4 weeks if you discount the golf excursions, without noticing that the building has what appears to the admittedly inexpert eye like a perfectly serviceable flagpole right on top of it already, but we learned that President Trump proposes to pay for the 2 further flagpoles out of his own pocket. And when has Donald Trump ever said he was going to pay for something and then didn't? Answer us that.
And on the subject of Trump yesterday, USA Today published an exclusive investigation that they say shows that various Trump organizations have a history of not paying small businesses and individuals in full for their services.
We learned, therefore, that whichever DC area flagpole installers intend to bid for the gig should probably ask for cash up front. But we learned that this was not the only increasingly vital public works being undertaken by Trump's administration. We learned of the latest important advance in the crusade of US Secretary of Defense as of this recording, Pete Hegseth, to strip the US military of its modern, effete, wokest, tiptoeing through the tulips tendencies.
No more pronouns, no more excuses, no more quotas, no more woke bull.
And return it to being the kind of skull-crushing, blood-drinking death machine of which General George S. Patton himself would have been proud.
Now, there's a green room adjacent to the press briefing room that used to have a table in the middle with some chairs around it where officials would study their notes before they would go out and brief reporters. So what Secretary Hegseth did was he asked for it to be modified into more of a makeup studio.
However, we learned, and greatly to our regret, as Hegseth is pretty much writing these for us at this point, that he might be well advised to make the most of his taxpayer-funded foundation blusher and eyeshadow while he can, as we learned that Hegseth may have delighted us long enough.
We are following a developing story out of the White House where, according to NPR, the White House has now begun the process of looking for a new Secretary of Defense.
At which point it feels necessary to insert the familiar disclaimer that this is all more or less current as of this recording. If Hegseth has, by the time you hear this, been sacked and replaced by Hulk Hogan, Kid Rock, Bunny Pounds, a 100-foot flagpole, a heron, or who or whatever, we hope you appreciate that we do our best to keep up.
I think so.
Your support means a great deal in these trying times. We learned that vultures had commenced hovering after it turned out that Secretary Hegseth had copied in another bunch of non-essential personnel, among them his wife and brother, on the details of imminent military operations. But we learned that in keeping with the warrior ethos he is determined to inculcate, he was striking a defiant and above all sober tone in laying down a firm and above all sober line on what compromises he is simply not prepared to make.
And get along to go along. And, start doing Meet the Press and going to the Council on Foreign Relations and spending time with all the new cocktail sipping crowd. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because President Trump asked me to bring warfighting back to the Pentagon every single day. That is our focus.
Our lawyers inform us that we are permitted to describe his demeanour as energetic, vigorous, and if we fancy pushing our luck, animated. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's show, the Nigerian-born North Carolina-raised musician Uwade grew up steeped in the sounds of hymnal choral music and Nigerian highlife on her dad's car radio. Her voice is what opens Fleet Fox's Grammy-nominated album Sure, and from there she's gone on to tour extensively in support of that band, along with opening for R&B and indie stalwarts like Jamila Woods, Sylvan Esso, The Strokes, and many more. I spoke to Uwade ahead of the release of her debut album, Florilegium, about how her classics background informs her work. I did want to start by asking, as your debut album loomed, if you've got used to the idea yet that this is actually your job, because you were going to be an academic, or indeed you actually are an academic.
That is such a good question. I'm still working it out in my head, because when I go back to California, I will be landing on Sunday and then going to class on Monday. And so this will all have been a wonderful dream that also actually happened. And I think, I'm accepting that it is my job, but I also just happen to have two jobs that don't really know or care about each other. So
is it hard to keep both those balls in the air, as it were? Does it feel like different sides of your brain are applied to both, or each?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like academia is sort of, because of what I'm doing, I work in the humanities, but it's kind of, language learning can be quite sort of methodical and sort of logical, and it feels like I'm sort of putting puzzles together all the time, and it requires quite a bit of focus and concentration, and sort of playing shows is very different for me. It's kind of more intuitive and more free-flowing, and I'm thinking, but I'm feeling more than I'm thinking. So doing the thinking, feeling jump can be a bit strange. Yeah.
But have you, listeners may be familiar with the origin story that Robin Pecknold from Fleet Foxes saw you singing Mykonos on Instagram and got in touch and asked you to sing on Fleet Foxes records, that's got to be a bit of a how did I get here moment right there. But are you still having those when you're on stage?
Yes, definitely. I mean, yesterday, or was it the day before yesterday, I had the debut show at the Lower Third in London, and I've never had like a headline show before, and so just seeing everyone in the room and knowing that they bought tickets willingly to see me, I wasn't just supporting this incredible band, Fleet Foxes. I love them so much, but it's sort of like, yeah, it's Ua's here, cool. But this was like, oh, I want to see Ua, and that was sort of mind blowing to me that people actually came to see me.
That moment when you stand on a stage and look out and think, I don't actually personally know all these people.
Yeah. It is very strange. It's very strange.
I will ask you to introduce the album, mostly because I'm a bit nervous about pronouncing the title correctly.
Sure. It's Florilegium.
Florilegium. See, yes. I would have gone with the soft G there.
Yes, and I think that's actually the way it's recorded in dictionaries, because when I'm doing classics, we sort of pronounce things the like Ciceronian way. I do a hard G, which I don't think is actually correct, but it's the way I've decided to say it. So
possibly the first time anybody has ever used the adjective Ciceronian on Monocle Radio. Quite fancy and rarefied though we are, so thank you for that. But according to the internet, I did look the term up. This is a Latin rendering of the Greek idea of anthology.
Exactly. Yes.
Is that how the album feels to you? Does it feel like a bunch of different sorts of stuff rather than one coherent thing?
It does. And I kind of wanted it to feel that way because since it's my debut record, I think there can be a lot of pressure to sort of make a statement, have a sort of a clear sound, and this is exactly who I am and exactly what I'm saying. And frankly, I've just been writing songs and I just wanted to put them all together. And so I was like, how can I make a medley of songs sound good? Oh, it's a bouquet of flowers. It's an anthology. It's Florilegium. Yeah.
That said, though, a debut album is always kind of a special moment. Well, actually, it's an extremely special moment. But was there any self-consciousness attached to the fact that, people, a bit like standing on stage, realising I haven't been personally introduced to all these people, that idea that people are going to hear this. This isn't necessarily just a thing I'm doing for myself anymore.
Yeah, I think more and more as the sort of singles come out, I think that feeling is becoming realer. But I don't know, when I was just listening to it as we were sort of in the process of recording, it felt very much like I just wanted to make songs that I like to listen to. And I did at the time. But now it's kind of like, wow, a random person just commented, thank you for sharing this.
I mean, there will doubtless be much made of your own heritage and what that brings to the album, Nigeria via North Carolina, but it's a thought that occurred to me, and apologies if this is a reach, but is it possible, because of obvious reasons of history, that those two places are actually quite closer together than they may look on the map?
That's true. That's a good point. I'd never thought about it that way, but I do think, there's a connection there. There's an obvious connection, but I like the idea of, thinking of the huge gulf of ocean as like separating two very different places and like me attempting to stretch across them and bring them together in my own way.
Well, we'll play out on one of your attempts to bridge that gap. If you'd like to select one track from the album and introduce it for us, that's what will play us out.
Sure. So the song that I will select is called Harmattan, and it is kind of an attempt to do the thing that we just talked about, which is bring Nigeria and North Carolina together. I hope you enjoy it.
True.
That was Uwade. Her debut album, Florilegium, is out today and altogether recommended. That is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our guests today, Phil Clark, Juliet Linley and Kate Lucy. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Have a good weekend and thanks for listening.